Okay, since it is 7 o'clock and we like to get started on time, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. My name is Matt Bender. I am your adult program coordinator here at the Schaumburg Township District Library. Tonight we have a very special community partner with Nancy and Jean. They're going to talk to us about native plants. But before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few things. The first is that if you need closed captioning, it is available to you. Look at your Zoom toolbar. That's where all those icons are. And you'll see one that has the closed captioning symbol and says live transcript. Click or type on that box, click or tap, don't type, tap on that box. And you should be able to enable, disable, or change the size of the font. Secondly, I would like to point out that one of our local organizations, the Schaumburg Community Garden Club, will be having a native plant sale coming up. And I'm just going to share my screen here real quick and show you how easy it is to find the material on their website. So I went to schaumburggardenclub.org up here in my address bar. That's schaumburggardenclub.org with 2 G's for garden and Schaumburg. You'll see here that they have the link for the plant sale, and they are taking orders through April 29th. If you click on the photographs, it'll bring you to the details. Plant pickup on Saturday, May 21st and Sunday the 22nd at Spring Valley Nature Center right here in Wheaton. And if you scroll down, you can see the different kinds of items that you can order. So let's say you wanted some woodland wildflowers. There we go. You can see the price. You can also see what hopefully grows in your garden. And again, that event is going to be May 21st and 22nd at Spring Valley Nature Center. Put your pre-orders in now through the end of April. And I would be remiss if I did not remind you about the library's plant swap that is coming up with the Hoffman Estates Garden Club right here at our library on May 21st. So I think that is more than enough for me. So how about we hand it over to the people that you came here to see. Today we have Nancy Lamaya and Jean Muntz, both of which are a part of the organization Wild Ones and Start in Your Yard, both of which try to encourage people to grow native plants. So tonight they're going to talk about identifying native plants, growing native plants, and how you can help bring back some of our native species. I'll hand it over to Nancy and Jean.
Thanks. I'm going to just take a second here and share my screen. It is. Okay, and are you seeing it correctly? Okay.
Yes.
Well, we thank you for having us. We really appreciate, Matt, you're inviting us and the library hosting us. We love our library in Elgin, as I'm sure you do your library there in Schaumburg. They just so enrich our communities, and we thank you. And we're very happy to have an opportunity to share our initiative. It's a Wild Ones initiative called Start in Your Yard. We're happy to share that with you. And to talk about getting to know native plants and adding them to our landscapes. Just a note, slides like this one that I'll be showing you today will be available on startinyouryard.com. And all of the references we make will be part of an informational handout that will be sent to you as a follow-up from Zoom. Our initiative, Start in Your Yard, is inspired by Doug Tallamy's work. Reading his books and hearing his presentations has informed the way we think about native plants We even took the name of our initiative from his book, Nature's Best Hope, that blue one there with the bluebird. A new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. He writes and presents in ways that not only inform, but also inspire. Well, you may be attending this session because you recognize that our modern ways of living have interrupted Earth's life-sustaining systems. The crises in weather, agriculture, species die-off, air and water quality show us that ignoring how nature works does not serve us well. Better to learn nature's ways, the strategies and techniques nature has evolved over the billions of years that life has been refining and perfecting life. Today, I want to talk to you briefly about two of nature's ways, two that underlie start in your yard. Now, that may not seem like what you zoomed in to hear, but I will be talking about getting to know native plants and how to get started using them in light of these two ideas that put them in context. Then Jean will talk about design ideas and considerations as you get started or continue with native plants. Well, obviously, right? Who would confuse their lawn with the tree growing in it? But who might think that as long as it's green, whether it's turf grass, green leaves, cultivated flowers, if it's green, it's food for the insects and animals that need plants to eat. What's not obvious is what Doug Tallamy has discovered over the many decades he's been studying the relationship between insects and the plants that host them. Dr. Tallamy is an entomologist. He studies insects, the very bugs that so many people short-sightedly think we'd be better off without. His research, writing, and teaching have helped us understand that there are highly evolved relationships between native plants and the insects that live with them. To oversimplify, we know that plants don't want to be eaten, so they've developed ways to survive the insects that want to eat them. And they're very successful. Some are tough to chew. They smell or taste really bad. Some have hairy leaves. Some make whoever eats them sick. They have lots of strategies, but over thousands of years, particular insects have adapted so that they can eat particular plants. Now, many insects have adapted to eating only one family of plants. They're called specialists. And the monarch butterfly is a well-known example. Monarch caterpillars are specialists. They eat only milkweed. Without milkweed to lay their eggs on, monarchs are doomed. Milkweed is critical to their survival. But from some people's perspectives, milkweed plants have been regarded as weeds. Well, it is in the name. People thought it was okay to get rid of them, and what happened? The monarchs began to disappear too. Monarchs must have milkweed to feed their caterpillars. So as it disappeared, so too did the monarchs. Now, there are insects that can eat more than just one family of plants, and they're called generalists. These insects can use a wider variety of food sources, but not so many as you might think. The most general generalists can feed on only a small assortment of the many plant families that are native here. Even our generalists are very specialized. Insects can't eat just any old plant. So without the kind of plant it can eat, an insect is doomed because it would take so long for an insect species to adapt itself, to change enough that it can feed on a different kind of plant. Our birds must have insects to survive. Insects must have plants they can eat, but they can't eat the grass in our lawns. They can't eat plants that we brought in from far away. And in most of our yards, that's all there is. a grassy lawn with some plants, shrubs, and trees that developed with other insects in another part of the world. Our plant blindness prevents us from recognizing which plants host insects, insects that feed the birds that sing us awake in the summer, insects that pollinate the food we depend on, insects that are an integral part of the web of life. Our plant blindness prevents us from recognizing the plants that are complicit in destroying habitat. Our affliction blinds us to the difference between a merely decorative plant or an invasive destructive plant and one that hosts the fauna we've so widely displaced. When we understand that plants are not interchangeable, we come face to face with the fact that decisions we make about what to grow on our land are critical to the survival of insects and birds that are disappearing at alarming rates. You may have seen this shocking statistic, or this one. One way we can make a significant contribution to changing our impact on the planet is to start in our yards, adding native plants to form habitat for birds and bees, the butterflies and lightning bugs, to help them survive until the human species gets its act together. And we can take a first step by learning who our native plants are. The artist Liz Anakozik draws our dilemma in her booklet, Plant Blindness. Green plants all look the same to so many, and few understand that they're not interchangeable. Peter Forbes of the Center for Whole Communities has said that we, in our consumption-driven world, can recognize 1,000 product brands, but cannot name 10 plants native to where we live. Now, typically, we know the names of that which we value. Getting acquainted with our native flora and fauna helps us care about their fate, care about the impact we make on the land where we can make a home for them. So who are these native plants? Is Queen Anne's lace native to the American Midwest, as so many people think? Like its name, Queen Anne's lace came here from abroad, but people know its name. It's very common and familiar. People just assume it's native because it grows where people don't garden. Instead, it's naturalized, meaning that it was introduced here and now grows freely in disturbed places. Now, this is not Queen Anne's lace, although it looks like a yellow version. Golden Alexander is a native plant. It's very easy to grow, blooms abundantly in the spring, and thrives in many conditions. It's a host for many beneficial insects, and it blooms when there's very little else blooming. Now, are daylilies native plants, as so many people think? Actually, they hail from Asia. This is another example of a plant so familiar that people just assume it's native. It has naturalized from coast to coast here, traveling west with the pioneers who found them to be very hardy travelers. Their names imply that they're lilies, but they actually grow from tubers, not bulbs. And those tubers store so much energy. That's how they could make it coast to coast. These are two native plants that are actual lilies. But while daylilies are happy to grow in disturbed areas, areas that have been grazed, mowed, plowed, excavated, invaded, these beauties require a more stable, specific community of plants to thrive. Are natives the plants that grow where we don't mow? Well, sometimes we get lucky and there are native plants that emerge from the seed bank when the land is no longer mowed. But because most of our land has been so disturbed, it's much more common for these invasive species to grow when mowing ceases. What people don't realize is that these common naturalized plants don't support our native insects and birds because they evolved in other regions of the world with other partner species. Our native plants are not the ones we commonly see. Where can we find them? Where can we begin to get acquainted? In our forest, prairie, and wetland preserves, you can see native plants, but because many of the exotic plants we grow in our yards escape, they have invaded these preserves, and you're likely to see some invasive plants too. The only solution is to begin to learn who's who. Watch for walks and tours of native areas with people who can tell you what you're seeing. Or best of all, volunteer in a preserve with experienced naturalists. You'll learn a ton. And of course, Matt showed you a great place to go. Go to the garden sale website and see those gorgeous plants that they have for sale there. And if you're ready, purchase some of those. That's how you learn to know them, living with them. Or find out where native gardens have been planted in Schaumburg or Hoffman Estates or Wheaton, like these in Elgin, St. Charles, and Geneva. And if you visit the Navy Pier, the Art Institute, the Shedd Aquarium, or Millennium Park in Chicago, you'll find that they're doing lots of landscaping with native plants. You can get an app on your smartphone that you can use to identify plants. iNaturalist is widely used and available for free. It connects you with more than 400,000 scientists and naturalists to help answer your questions. You can also report your observations. In fact, right now there's a spring ephemeral project in and around Kane County for locating and reporting these spring beauties. If you'd like to know more about it, we can give you information during Q&A. Now, the Picture This app is not free, but it's very useful. And when my results from both apps agree, I feel pretty confident that I have the correct information. So whether it's grasses, sedges, coneflowers and milkweeds, goldenrods and asters in the shade, goldenrods and asters in the sun. A milkweed you'd never guess is a milkweed. Spring treasures, plants with attitude, or shrubs. We have a rich heritage of native plants, but we're not familiar with them. We don't see our heritage in bloom at the nursery or in our neighborhoods. We don't see them in our public plantings. And even when we go to the forest preserve, they may or may not be in bloom or recognizable at that specific time. We're blind to our own treasures. Yet there are native plants to fit into any kind of conditions that exist here. We don't have to change our soil, sun, or water conditions. We can just learn which plants call these conditions home. The plants that like to grow in the conditions we have where we live. Now, how can you learn which plants would thrive in your conditions? How can you decide what to plant and where to plant it? To start, you can go to startinyouryard.com. You see the address up here for a great video on how to get started. It's done by one of our Wild Ones members and is the first of a series of 10. It includes how to get the ground ready for the new native plants and takes you forward from there. There's a great deal of information online in books available from other people. So you're going to have to decide how much you want to learn before you actually get started. Now, I tend to be a by guess and by golly gardener. I often plant the same species in at least 3 places in my yard to see where it likes to grow. But one thing I did find out before I started was which plants were invasive and needed to be removed. And you can find a starting place on this information on our website, startinyouryard.com. I started out with plant lists, so I knew which plants to use in sun, shade, or somewhere in between. And I did pay attention to how wet the soil is so I could choose plants that prefer these conditions. And plant lists, as you can see, provide this kind of information, plus the size of the plant. You can see there's a lot of information on startinyouryard.com about native plants and how to research them. But while I've primarily learned through experimenting, there are people who do want to take a more scientific approach, examine the conditions, understand its background and so forth. And Morgan Vogt's article on Start in Your Yard has great information about soil testing, looking at the pH balance and comparing it with what the species prefers, taking into account the makeup of the soil, and much more. I would suggest that you find someone experienced with native plants to talk to. They'll happily tell you the mistakes they made, and you can profit from them and make your own new ones. You're welcome to reach out to our Greater Kane County Wild Ones chapter, and you may find that eventually you'd like to have a chapter of this national organization in the Schaumburg-Hoffman Estates area. The links are on the handout. Now, through Start in Your Yard, Wild Ones members do site visits. We go out and walk with property owners who are looking to get started with native plants or to take their yard further. And these are pages from a book that we're putting together to take with us so we can show people what the plants we're recommending look like. And you can see that these slides show individual native plants. Here's a Marybelle's, and good partner plants that would grow well with the Marybelle's, plants you might want to consider planting together. We show these groupings because scientists and naturalists are helping us understand that native plants grow in communities. They cooperate and compete in complex systems. Diverse organisms work together to meet their own needs. You may be hearing about mycelia, fungi, microorganisms, the incredible realm of life in the soil. It's referenced in mainstream books and articles and films these days. Perhaps you've heard about the World Wide Web of fungi that connects our trees and allows them to communicate. You may have seen the film Fantastic Fungi and the ways mushrooms and their mycelia are an integral part of these systems. Maybe you've watched Kiss the Ground and have begun to realize that there's an incredible amount of life that thrives in healthy soil. There is a marvelous complexity, amazing reciprocity, mind-boggling intelligence in the systems that have kept our planet in balance over the millennia. Unfortunately, we have popularized a style of landscaping that considers plants as decorations, not as functional members of the working systems that our planet's health depends on. In our quest to civilize everything, we've smoothed and contained, regulated and isolated until connected wild communities are unknown where we live. We've gotten rid of plants that we didn't know or value, and in so doing lost their functions that we didn't understand. Plant roots and fungi that would keep our water clear and healthy. Plant communities that would keep our air safe to breathe. Systems that produce no waste because everyone's waste is someone else's food. Wildness that would shelter and feed insects and plants. Wildness that calms and soothes us because it is our heritage. In our neighborhoods, we don't have communities of plants growing together to provide habitat and maintain balance. Instead, we grow a monoculture, one species growing alone, the grass in our lawns. We've fallen in love with a landscape look that not only lacks diversity, but also disturbs our streams and rivers. The way grass grows, it is virtually impermeable. Very little rain can soak into turf grass. 75% of it runs off carrying fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides into our streams and destroying communities of both flora and fauna there. And of course, 100% of rainwater runs off our driveways, our patios, and sidewalks. So during rain events, the combined water running off our lawns and our hardscape overload the streams and rivers. These large volumes of water eat away the banks that were stable when rain fell on woodlands, prairies, and wetlands that absorbed it and returned it to the aquifer below. Perhaps you've installed a rain barrel to help keep the water on your land where it's an asset. Today's massive amounts of lawn degrade our waterways both chemically and mechanically. Massive amounts of lawn? Amazingly, yes. Our mentor, Doug Tallamy, estimates that there are 40 million acres of lawn in the US, 40 million acres lost to the systems that sustain life. He proposes that we each plant half of our lawn with native plants. If we were all to get in on this, it would create 20 million acres of habitat, 20 million acres of food for hungry critters. Dr. Tallamy's homegrown national park is a big idea, one big enough to stretch us past what we might think is possible. Converting just half of our huge national lawn would create the largest national park in our country, bigger than our 13 largest national parks, including Yellowstone, Denali, Grand Tetons, Grand Canyon, the Everglades, Yosemite, and the Smokies combined. The native plants we're returning to our land know how to grow here. Once they're established, they don't need us to feed and water and protect them, unlike our lawns. On this slide, you can see the abundance of these plants both above and below ground. They developed to thrive here. What a contrast with the turf grasses over here on the left that comprise our lawns. This certainly makes it clear, the contrast. Nature's systems, the systems that make our lives possible, are complex and interrelated. Paving over large parts of them, degrading their ability to function, knocks the whole out of balance. This biodynamic engine is a marvel. The more we learn, the more we are amazed at the complex cooperation and competition, reciprocity and balance, the efficiency and lack of waste. As we learn about what we've been destroying without considering its effects, we are coming to see our land with new eyes. Aldo Leopold, a pioneering biologist and naturalist from Wisconsin, reminds us that our land is not merely soil. It is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soil, plants, and animals. So read one of Dr. Tallamy's books, go to startinyouryard.com, watch a video presentation of his ideas. He will help you catch his vision for what we can do in our own yards, how we can alter the way we think about our land, and thus alter how we choose to treat it. You want to do something to help. Start in your yard. Thank you. And here's Jean. Jean?
Thanks, Nancy. I forgot I was muted. Forgot I was muted there for a minute.
Uh-huh.
I forgot I was muted there for a minute. My husband, Dave, and I, can you hear me, Nancy?
Yes.
Okay, okay. My husband, Dave, and I live in the country on land that was retired farmland before we built our house into the side of the hill. Back then, our pastures prompted me to purchase plants guaranteed to reclaim and renature such land. I unwittingly purchased and planted what are recognized today to be some of the most challenging invasive species known to gardeners. We don't have gutters, so rain sheets off the roof into a channel on the ground, down the hill, into the dry stream bed, which you see on the right, and then into a shallow rain garden beyond. There, the rain is absorbed back into the ground within less than 24 hours. So all rain stays on my land. The rain garden is pictured in spring. So you see a grid of sedges through which various forbs, the fancy name for blooming plants, will come forth over summer and fall. Both of these Doug Tolomei books had a huge impact on me. I would say after reading his first, Bringing Nature Home, I became more conscious of my role as a gardener, the responsibilities I carried as the decision maker for my land. Dots were connected about how all the other species are designed to work together for the ecosystem that supports me. The ecosystem that is my garden, my yard, my neighborhood. Truth is, my responsibilities concerning the global climate crisis seems way too vast for my brain to comprehend, but Dr. Tolomei is able to bring it down to a grassroots approach, pun intended. Where to begin? Examples here are all modest in size, yet they all demonstrate effective ways to begin to reduce grass. We see how they can be located anywhere. They can create attractive contours, and even though small, they are guaranteed to provide instant, meaningful ecological benefit for the yard we share with many in the midst of the neighborhoods we inhabit. Is there a place in your yard that speaks to you, or the view out of a window you enjoy? Consider locations such as along a driveway, on a parkway, under a tree. It could be an island planting, linking several trees, existing trees together. It could be along the side of an outbuilding, or simply expanding current planting beds by 1 or 2 feet. Then there's the lot line you share with your neighbor. Could this become a green corridor that you develop together? Or you might look at what you think of as a problem area in your yard, like shade where no grass will grow, a frequently wet area, an area that's difficult to mow, like a slope. These are all worthy candidates for a native plant garden. And here's the easiest way to prep for a new planting bed: smothering grass with layers of wet newspaper or wet cardboard, and then covering several inches, 4 to 6 inches, with bark mulch and or leaves if you have them. Some sand or stone for weight if you need. Keep some moisture on this, and these materials will biodegrade. Plants can be installed directly through into dead sod. By not disturbing the surrounding soil, weed seeds are not exposed. However, if one is planting into tilled soil, mulching the new plants is advised as they are getting established. Consider prepping the season before planting, such as prepping in the fall to plant next spring. Many are surprised to learn our beloved lawn is actually considered an impermeable surface, like Nancy was speaking of. However, if we view rain as the resource nature intended, we gardeners might look at creative and beautiful ways to capture this runoff. Homeowners who have issues of flooding or standing water or drainage from neighboring locations can remediate by installing rain gardens, bioswales, using rain barrels, downspout gardens, and dry stream beds to direct the flow, while planting native species, of course. All this is officially known as green infrastructure. Dr. Ptolemy's research has found that despite all that attention we give the grass, the soil beneath becomes depleted. He has calculated that 80 to 90% of the average residential lot is turf grass, leaving the remaining for trees, shrubs, and other plantings in depleted soil. It doesn't have to stay that way. Once you help us spread this message that Dr. Ptolemy says the solution is to plant more native species, homeowners might become excited to know their yard can become one small but important piece of his homegrown national park. And Start in Your Yard stands ready to help. The yard on the lower right shows what's possible when the percentages are reversed. An example of a living landscape, Dr. Ptolemy would say. And words I might use to describe this would be lush, inviting, a little mysterious. I might want to go up those steps and see what's there. Well, let's tonight consider the vertical layers of a given landscape, starting with the tallest, the canopy, then the understory, the shrub layer, the herbaceous, the ground cover, and finally vines as you see them growing up the one tree. Looking at our own yards, existing layers can be enhanced and missing layers can be created. Reintroducing layers to residential landscapes is the best strategy for restoring biological function in a beneficial way. When we look at the canopy layer, the layer that brushes the sky, the crowns of these trees are first to catch the sunlight, their branches affect airflow, temperature is moderated, habitat for other species is provided, and huge amounts of carbon dioxide and oxygen are given out. Well, here are 4 examples of canopy trees in our ecosystem. The canopy king in our ecosystem is the oak. It's our top keystone plant because of the life it supports. Along with, you see the hickory, the maple, and the mighty elm, as it used to look, overarching residential streets before the introduction of Dutch elm disease. If you're lucky enough to have mature trees, that might be a place to begin layering in. And if you're not so fortunate, one of the first questions to ask is, where am I going to plant an oak or 2 or 3? The next layer below is the canopy understory layer. Below the canopy is the understory. The relatively small scale of many residential landscapes might limit tall growing canopy trees, but it will have room for lower growing understory trees. This layer will serve as nesting sites for some, cover for many, and are a graceful transition from the high scale canopy to human scaled features such as benches and paths through a garden. Understory trees may frame a view, provide shade in summer, and allow sunlight through in the winter. And next, the shrub layer. This healthy shrub layer contributes significantly to habitat richness and biodiversity by providing cover and shelter, obviously, but it also provides berries high in fat in time for fall migrations and winter hibernations. Shrubs are generally defined as multi-stemmed plants growing from the ground to the 20-foot level. Here you see viburnum on the left. There are many species of viburnum. Aronia or chokeberry in the middle, and one of my favorite, the witch hazel, here in bloom in November and December. It's one of the latest blooming natives in our Midwest region. I like the suggestion that shrubs and small trees can be thought of as the walls of our outdoor rooms. We often forget about vines, but they are ready to climb a tree, go over an arbor, or lean upon a fence to add beauty and function to a yard. The vine we know of as poison ivy is a native, but better options for residential landscape would be the four shown here. On the left, Virginia creeper, otherwise known as woodbine, with its stunning red fall color. Others would be a native honeysuckle vine, the yellow, a native clematis, or native bittersweet on the far right. The next layer, herbaceous layer, is the diversity is much greater in this layer. There's more color, more texture, more form, fragrance, seasonal interest is possible here. There will also be more cover and shelter, sources for nectar, pollen, seeds, and fruit. And it is in this layer that one is wise to choose plants appropriate to the conditions of the site, the ones that want to occupy the same niche. Nancy introduced how plants want to grow in communities. And then there's the idea that in the plant world, there are specialists that need very specific conditions, and generalists who will thrive over a wide variety of conditions. When starting a new native garden, rely on a mix of clump-forming species, grasses or sedges, and then add in plants that regularly self-seed or expand on underground rhizomes. This will begin to create a durable herbaceous layer. Don't forget some spring ephemerals interspersed to provide early bloom and then disappear. Plants in the aster and goldenrod family will supply interest later in the season. Remember, no bare soil is appropriate in a native planting. The generosity of nature is to provide a resource many gardeners overlook, even discard. It's unfortunate the term most often used for the accumulation of organic matter on the ground is litter. Ground layer litter plays a critical role in conserving moisture and replenishing soil with organic matter and nutrients. It creates niches, microhabitats for animals, insects, and plants. Leave the leaves, period. Resist the urge to clean up last year's plant stocks until after temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees. Many butterflies, bees, and others are currently overwintering in the leaves and hollow stems of last year's plants. Here you see a good example of why we say in a native garden, exposed soil is not a feature we encourage. After all, this is weed suppression at its best. Pictured are three of the early spring ephemerals coming through: the spring beauty on the left, the violet, and the mayapple. They are all taking advantage of available sunlight, blooming and then disappearing as the overstory canopy and quick-growing ground plants come forth. This is seasonal successional planting, planning blooms for each season. And it's an important design feature to build in your overall garden plan. Here's a great example of representing all of those layers, or most of those layers mentioned, because I don't see a vine. But notice no soil is exposed. Ground cover plantings offer full coverage for that moisture retention and weed seed suppression. Notice the herbaceous layer where you see ferns growing in the shade of the shrub layer, and then up to the understory layer, all these layers within the canopy of this beautiful mature oak. Okay, I'm going to give you some cliff notes on native plant terminology. On the left, the well-known purple coneflower is our example. Native plant species are identified using a binomial system, two names, the genus, which is always capitalized, and the species, which is always in lowercase. So here you see the purple coneflower known as Echinacea purpurea. We refer to this as a straight species, a straight native species. Cultivars, selective breeding by humans of natives, is what you see on the right. They will be labeled with the genus, capitalized, the species, lowercase, and then followed by a name in single italics, as you see demonstrated on the upper right there. There is a need to continue to put benevolent pressure on our garden centers. We encourage you to visit your favorite one and ask to see what they have in the way of native straight species. When native plants are offered at garden centers, the vast majority have been selected for a particular trait, something like an enhanced blossom color, a larger blossom size, leaf irrigation, etc. These cultivars have never grown naturally in the wild. And many of these enhanced features negatively affect the native pollinators and leaf eaters. Doug Ptolemy says he would love to see straight species sold right next to the cultivars of natives, so that those of us who value function over aesthetics would have a choice. On the next slide, I have a true confession to make. I've never purchased from any of these sources. However, I use catalogs from these Midwestern native plant growers for reference. They are a wealth of information. They're easier than a book to reach for. They have beautiful photos with common and botanical names, the growing conditions, and height, bloom time, light requirements, root type, info about.
Jean, I'm going to interrupt. We can't hear you.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what is causing that, but if you're turning, yeah. So
okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that's right.
Okay.
So I'm yes, waxing eloquent about these catalogs because of all the resources they provide for us. One can make a plant list using the resources of this catalog and carry it to the local native plant sale for reference. Typically, you will find these native plant sale, local native plant sales are in the spring and early fall. And Matt told you about the Schomburg, no, let me see. Let me get the name right here. It was Schomburg Community Garden Club native plant sale. When we talk about the canopy layer, the next slide, Doug Ptolemy reminds us trees evolve to grow together as in a forest. They intertwine their roots, forming a root mass that is nearly impossible to uproot. If we start with young trees and plant them in groups of 3 on 10-foot centers, the resulting root mass would keep them locked in place through thick and thin. Surely a little grove of trees would be viewed as an attractive element in one's yard, along with other plants selected for additional layers. Because of Doug Ptolemy's research, we know in our ecosystem, oaks produce the most food. Caterpillars are what he and his researchers have quantified. Some 480 species of caterpillars on oaks in our Midwest region. Of these species, 94% drop to the ground to complete a life cycle in the soil or the leaf litter. Ground covers such as ginger, fern, foam flower, mayapple, woodland phlox, all shown here, are perfect sites for these beneficial creatures to complete their development safely. Another reason to consider not mowing under a tree and building a layered landscape. In general, a native landscape will have more natural, less formal look. Be generous in your plantings. In nature, plants grow in drifts. When starting a new bed, consider buying and planting species in uneven numbers, 5, 7, 9, 11, on and on. A shady location will have interest throughout the season when it's planted with a variety of textures. Repeating the same plant in a planting adds rhythm to the overall design. And distinct edges in a planting will make it appear intentional. Throughout the season in a sunny location, grasses can provide support for the blooming forbs. Some native forbs will appear more as exclamation points in the overall design. Embrace this. Mowed paths and a mowed area rug, as you see here, leaves space to play a game or throw a ball. Consider how tall your plantings will be, because height control is one of the most effective ways for your garden to fit into an urban setting. If you have 6 or more hours of sun, consider starting with some of the well-known prairie forbs and grasses. Find out what likes to grow in the same communities, those that will like to grow in similar conditions. A collection of shrubs, like the planting on this berm, creates privacy and a haven for birds and other small species. Small trees and shrubs at the bird feeder, you will notice, provide a much used waiting room for arrivals and departures. In this photo on the left, small rocks provide a distinct edge on this berm, including a water source for our feathered and furry visitors to the garden, can also be a design feature if it comes with the commitment to keep it clean. Consider transitioning from, excuse me, I lost my, here we go. Avoid the wall-to-wall look with a grassy carpet in the middle and all the shrubs and trees pushed around the edge. Instead, provide a visual entry into, a passage through, or a beckoning space beyond, as you see in these photos. A hammock or a bench or a swing offers an invitation to stay a while. Sculpture, a bridge, a fire pit, an arbor are all indicators this garden is managed and enjoyed. Indicate to neighbors and passers-by the importance of your native plantings with a sign. Allow me to introduce Mr. Harley Crane. He's named for his body parts, the Harley gas tank, and the Crane plumbing parts. He's agreed to pose so we can see 4 seasons in the same garden. At his feet in spring, ferns, sedges, and spring ephemerals such as mayapples, prairie phlox, crested iris, and Jacob's ladder. In the summer, coneflower and culver's root are the most visible, but there are golden Alexander, sedges, grasses, and prairie petunias, brown-eyed Susans, goldenrods, and asters that will bloom in the fall. Here he is on a misty morning in late autumn. A few weeks earlier in September, he was enveloped in a cloud of lavender shorts aster. Now the witch hazel behind him has turned gold and will bloom in November and December. And on the right, covered in his blanket of snow, Harley Crane will be experiencing the frequent company of birds harvesting the seed heads all winter. There's real beauty in winter and lots of life. Consider transitioning from using great expanses of lawn. Let's recognize that what falls upon the land, such as leaves and water and rain, is intended to be a resource for the future life of this garden. And here's the clincher. With this diversity of native plantings, the land will heal, and we humans will get to know, to reconnect to the plants and the animals that make up this integrated, energetic, and may I say sacred system. Gardens matter because they can literally save species. They can heal us. Many of our medications come from plants, but studies show students in classrooms with trees outside the windows or hospital patients with a view of nature perform better. Let's plant to attract the children. See the little one airborne on the right? We all benefit from places to play or to be surrounded by nature, to experience seasons in fabulous color, to follow paths, to see sunrise and sunset, to smell rain and hear peepers, to have an unexpected encounter with another species, and to be reminded that since the day we were born, the trees and plants have made oxygen for us to breathe. Wouldn't it be neat if the new indicator of status on the block had nothing to do with the greenest carpet of grass? Rather, it could be about the neighbor who can brag that he or she has seen a rusty patch bumblebee on the Monarda fistulosa, has come upon a nesting hummingbird in the 9-bark, in the Physocarpus opulifolius shrub, or enjoyed the company of Mr. Oriole, who perched on the chair while she planted her recently purchased flat of Carex grayi. It will enrich our lives to become familiar with the native plants, the work they do, their specialized relationships, and their names, and realize therefore, they deserve our protection and care. Come join us in this new approach to conservation that starts in your yard.
All right, and Nancy, unless you had anything else to say, I think we'll get to the Q&A.
Absolutely.
All right, if you have any questions, please put your questions into the Q&A box or the chat. And we have our first question here from Pat. Do you, meaning the both of you or Start in Your Yard or Wild Ones, do you have relationships with any local landscaping firms? My HOA could sure use someone with knowledge and commitment to native plants.
We do actually on our website, startinyouryard.com. On the resources page, if you scroll down a little ways, there's a listing of people who do native plants landscaping. So rather than to try to tell you who we know of, they're on that list on startinyouryard.com. And if for some reason you don't have access, let us know and I can send it to you.
Okay. While we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I think I'll ask one of my own. What are your favorite native plants to
Oh,
either see or to have in your own yard?
My friends laugh at me because we're walking around and I say, and this is just one of my favorites, and of course they hear that many times. Go ahead, Jean, though.
Oh, well, I revealed, that one of my favorites is the witch hazel shrub because it does bloom. It has beautiful golden fall color. And then after those leaves go away, then it blooms in November and December. I mean, how wonderful is that? And there's another native variety of that plant that has a reddish or an orangish tint to the blossoms. But the yellow one is the more common one here in the Midwest. I did see someone ask why we suggest planting in uneven numbers, 5, 7, 9, 11, and on. Well, just it's not against the law to plant an even number of plants, but it's just a design concept in many areas of design that the eye looking at an uneven number is somehow more attractive in some way, shape, or form. So most of us who do any kind of designing follow that rule. But one of the rules about design rules is that if you know them, then you're allowed to break them. Yeah.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with native plants.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, any kind of design. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I want to also mention one of my favorites that I always have to talk about is Prairie Smoke. And one of the reasons I love it is that it has gorgeous foliage. It's very deeply cut foliage. And it has been greening up for a month already. It is so early, but its foliage lasts all year and is beautiful all year. And then when it blooms early in the season, first it blooms pink, beautiful pink blooms. And then when they go to seed, they're like a puff of smoke where it gets its name. So it is beautiful all year long. And even in the winter, you can go out and see the plant there. It still has those cut leaves and so forth. So anyway, yeah.
All right, great. Ron would like to know, what is the best way to get rid of buckthorn?
Yeah. You know what?
Move.
I tell this story sometimes. I bought my house because it had such a wonderful privacy hedge. It was just great. I bought it for this huge hedge on 2 sides. And when I started birding and then started reading about why the birds are disappearing, I began to learn about buckthorn. And finally, I went out to look at my hedge. It was all buckthorn. So one year I spent from February to November cutting buckthorn and painting it. So if the plants are small, they have a very shallow root system and you can pull them out, especially if you have, I never can remember the name of this thing, but there's a special hoe that gets under the root and just pops it out. But if it's too large to do that, you cut it off and paint it with a stump and vine mixture that you can get at any garden center or your hardware, where have you. But you want to do it when it's not going to rain so that it doesn't get washed away. So there are some considerations. And again, talk to somebody who's done it. Oh, and we've all done it. So you can talk to anybody in the native plant community about that one.
Carl would like to know, are the partner plants based on being beneficial to the main prairie plant or just as a complementary plant in design?
They're plants that grow together in the same kind of conditions. And it's actually a little more complex than just showing, a group of plants. If you really want to get down to it, you want to look at what kind of area they grow together in. So there are resources to look at that. And then if you want to really get fancy, to look for plants that have tap roots, plants that have fibrous nets of roots so that they can share the same space without competing in a way that doesn't do them any good. So the basic reason is to get you to understand that you want to plant plants in plant communities, and then you can research as much as you like, or be a by guess and by golly gardener like me. But I recently took a class and I learned so much. I was like, yeah, I might have to give up this by guess and by golly thing. I'm really liking knowing all this stuff.
Well, and plant communities is another one of those areas that I don't think we understand everything yet. I think there are relationships yet to be determined or to be discovered. And we just respect that much has been discovered at this point, that there are communities, there are plants that want to be together. And if you're a vegetable gardener, there's some of that goes on with vegetables as well. There are some that like to be together and some that don't. So.
And that is another thing to just give a quick mention to. If you do grow vegetables, to plant your pollinator plants right near them is just great. You get your bees to the pollinator plants and then right onto your vegetables. So something to think about.
We have 400 native bees in the state of Illinois. It's 400 species of native bees. I mean, when we talk about bees, we tend to talk about honeybees, which aren't even native to the United States. So our native bees are the ones that want to use, they live alone, most of them, and they want to use the stalks of plants. So that's why we're talking about the dead stalks, not removing them too soon in the spring in your cleanup, because there are bees that have overwintered and their eggs and pollen are in there. They collect pollen. The bees are pollen collectors, they feed nectar, but they're specialized to pollen.
The pollen sticks to them. And then when they go to the next plant, the pollen rubs off there. Well, I mean, there are a lot of strategies for pollination. It's actually a very interesting topic.
Indeed. Peter or Sharon would like to know, is there a list on your website of native plants specific to Schaumburg?
No, go ahead, Jean.
Well, the ones that are specific to the Midwest, to the Illinois Midwest, upper Illinois Midwest, would include all of us. So, yeah.
And Jean, we had you cut out the ecotypes. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Well, there are, when we talked about genus and species of the native plant, there are what's called genotypes or ecotypes, where even that within that species, if they've only developed in the Elgin area, then their seeds, etc., would be the ecotype for Elgin. But and in that sense, there might be a different ecotype for Schaumburg, but that's maybe a little narrow talking about. But the growers tend to grow for the ecotype of our area, and they will grow for the radius of 50 miles. Most of them is what they use as their ecotype.
There used to be a nursery called Natural Garden out on Route 64 west of St. Charles. And their native plants were local ecotypes, they're called, which had all been gathered within I forget, 50 or 90 mile radius of where they were growing them.
And if you go to your plant sale, the native plant sale, you can ask the workers there, are these local ecotype, and it's very probable that they've purchased them from growers in this area, so they would be the local ecotype.
Yeah, we have plenty of growers here that provide the plants to these plant sales.
All right. Alice would like to know, I have an area with multiple bird feeders. It tends to get very weedy from volunteer seed droppings. Suggestions for ground cover?
Well, depending on your plant, your conditions there, if it's sun or if it's shade, if it's a shady area, I just love ginger. That's a pretty it covers it. Pretty forms a complete cover. Ginger for that area. Small ferns would be coming up in an area like that.
And I have a bird feeder pole in the sun. And as it's turned out, I did not intend this. I learned this from the plants. I have a black-eyed Susan that just insisted on growing there. So I have this fairly tall bank of plants under that feeder, and it certainly takes care of the problem. Nothing is going to compete with this. I can't think of but I can get it for you, the botanic name of the plant. But so that's another idea, something bushy and aggressive that will keep the other things out. Jean, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, or a heavy mulch of leaves, because leaves are a great weed suppressor. And even if those seeds fall on the leaves, it will keep them from sprouting in some cases. I wouldn't say completely.
Another plant that I'm experimenting with now, this will be my second season, and I see it's already coming back, but I was surprised to learn, one of our best supporters of lots and lots of insects is the native wild strawberry. And it's a real carpet former, I believe. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be learning just how well that would do, but that might be something you'd want to consider depending on your conditions, as Jean said.
And that would be more sunny. It would be happy in a sunnier location.
Yeah, sun part sun.
Part sun, part shade. Yeah.
It grows with runners. It propagates by sending out these runners. And I'm finding so far, that's why I say I'm just learning to live with it and know it better. But so far, it's been real easy to, if it goes where I don't want it, to just pull those up and clip them off. So anyway, it would be something to consider.
So somebody said, put in the chat, that the Garden Club, Schaumburg Garden Club they are selling the strawberry Nancy's talking about.
That's great.
It's at their plant sale. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. Actually, that does remind me of one other thing you might want to know about. There is a website done by the National Wildlife Foundation in association with Doug Tallamy, where you can go and put in your zip code.
Your zip code, yeah.
And it will tell you what the best plants are in terms of how much life they support for your zip code. So that's another, if you look National Wildlife Foundation, NWF, and Doug Tallamy, it will pop up. Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Joanne. Do you have recommendations for a very shady area?
Oh, lots. In fact, there's a handout on the website that I annotated my own list of plants and my experience with them. So I can heartily recommend that you take a look at that. It's done by height. So it goes all the way from, the very low ground cover up to a couple of very dramatic plants that grow in the shade and have some real size to them, and everything in between, and things that bloom, things that are ephemeral. So yeah, I would recommend that you take a look at that. one dramatic plant that I just love is, see, I'm doing it again, is Spikenard. And it gets quite large, even though it's growing in the shade, and then produces berries, very dramatic. Ginger that Jean mentioned is fabulous in the shade.
Ferns,
Some of the little
sedges.
Right, and woodland ephemerals, the bloodroot, one of the most gorgeous plants ever. It grows up so early in the spring with its leaf all wrapped around it, and then opens up, and finally this very white flower with, I forget how many petals. It really is a looker. So yeah, take a look at that list and yeah, see what you think.
Okay, I just wanted to share my screen very quickly here, just to talk about the native plants finder that Nancy and Jean have mentioned. So just to show you here,
Yeah.
I'm on the National Wildlife Foundation, nwf.org/native plant finder. And you can see here that you can search by zip code to find your native plants. So, and then you can see here what kinds of plants you can put. And then you can save your own list here, and you can find things that are best for pollinators.
That's
Great.
great. You could pop on there and find that. Thank you.
Okay, real quick here, because we do have a couple more questions. Denise would like to know, you said wild ones will come out to a yard and help someone starting a native garden. What kind of help is provided? Is there a cost? And how does this compare to the Master Gardener Conservation at Home program?
Well, Start in Your Yard, we're doing site visits as for free. We're not charging for these. But of course, we are unfortunately going to give preference to people who are in wild ones there in, but if we're not overloaded, actually, I think Kim said, our president of Wild Ones said, yeah, we'd be willing to go do some in Schaumburg. But yeah, this is the Conservation Foundation signs, Conservation at Home signs. Those are a certification. Once you've done it, then you get a sign that says, I did it. But the Start in Your Yard, we actually talk about what you might want to do, what might be an overall plan, what do you want to keep, what do you want to put into natives, how do you get started, just whatever, what do you need to get rid of, what's invasive, etc. And then we do have signs too. I've started and some others, and those are on the website as well. And Master Gardeners, as I understand it, they're part of the extension program from
U of I.
And they do not restrict themselves to native plants. So they have quite a different philosophy, at least from the ones that the people that I have met who are Master Gardeners. How about you, Jean? Do you?
Yeah, I would say that's my impression too, is that we're very focused on natives and those relationships and et cetera. And so it just depends on what you're looking for.
But I did just find out that the Master Gardeners, because they're part of the extension, they do soil testing. I don't imagine it would be like sending it out to a lab, but that is just a good thing to know.
Absolutely. Another question here. Are the plants that are sold at the typical hardware store or home center native plants, or do they just sell whatever sells?
They're mostly annuals, what would be called annuals. And no, I've never seen a native plant at an all-purpose, a box store or a hardware store. I don't see native plants.
And in addition to that, one of the problems with those plants is, and I'm not going to be able to name it, but they're treated with a chemical that is quite toxic to bees. So do you know the name, Jean?
Yeah, it's neonicotinoids is the, yeah. And in fact, I think there's a state or federal guideline that if a grower uses neonicotinoids, they are to label the plant. But I did see a plant labeled at the Home Depot saying, we have used neonicotinoids to ensure a bug-free experience in your yard, something like that. So they labeled it, but they didn't label that it's highly toxic to bees and other beneficial insects.
And it just illustrates the difference in perspective of whether everything is to the human way of thinking about things, or whether people are beginning to understand that we have got to change the way we think about these things in order to maintain the systems that support life, including our life. So things like this are crucially important when it comes to the whole issue of climate crisis. So.
Indeed. Just a few more questions here, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. Sue would like to know, how can I carefully plant under mature oaks without hurting them and remove grasses and weeds that are safe for the oak?
That's a really good question, Sue. I would do some leaf mulch down around under the oak. You don't want to make it real deep. You don't want to change the depth, but it would be important to buy what are called plugs, which are there, and that's what you'll see at these native plant centers. For the most part, they're selling plugs. They're not even a 2-inch pot with a rather deep depth to them, and those you can carefully dig in around the roots under an oak tree. Maybe start a little bit farther out and then let them flourish toward the trunk a little bit more.
The other thing you could do, there are a few plants that would germinate, and I can actually look this up. I told you I took a class. This was in the class about what will germinate in the shade. There aren't a whole lot of plants, but that might be another thing to consider.
All right. Laura would like to know, would spreading cardboard or newspaper take care of ivy? It keeps coming back and we don't want to spray it with chemicals.
Yeah, I'd weed whack it down to the nubbins to start. And then I'd use cardboard. I mean, it's newspaper is probably not going to stand up to ivy, but I'd use cardboard and a little bit of weight on it and leaf mulch, and see if over a season's period of time you can. My guess is you'll lift it up and there'll still be a little life there, but you will make some headway on it if you can smother it.
And if you can wait, if you can leave it on for a year with just mulch on top, it doesn't look bad, just with the mulch on top of it there. And then at least when you look underneath there, and I'm with Jean, it's going to look back at you and say, yep, I'm still here. But at least it's weakened now, and it may be easier to pull out or plant something that can hold its own against those dying roots.
Okay, Janice would like to know which website are you referring to for shade?
It's startinyouryard.com. Startinyouryard.com. It's on the resources page, and in the slide that I actually showed you there with the plant list, right at the top of the page, there's a woodland list of woodland plants, shade plants.
Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we could get on and show them that, but we don't need to do that. I know you're wrapping up.
Oh, well, you know, I can do something very quickly. All right.
On the little handout that will be coming with the follow-up video, follow-up email, there are references to this site, and then click on resources there at the top. And you see right at the beginning about shade plants. And if you click on shade plants,
Wow.
there's the handout. And then you can download that or just use it online, whatever. And then there's a reminder there at the bottom to be sure to shop using the botanic names so that you get the plant that is intended.
Okay, very cool. And then again, that's startinyouryard.com.
Yep.
And that's where you can find all of these
Yeah, and if you
links
scroll,
and resources.
yeah, and here, right here, scroll back up just a little to the next one up here. See where it says commercial, whoops, down one more. There we go, finding help, commercial list of landscapers. Do you want to click on that, the list of landscapers? Go over to the middle, there you go.
There we go. And there we go.
Yeah.
All right. Looks like we have one here in Schaumburg, Tallgrass Restoration LLC.
Yes, yes, it's a quite well-known, Jean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's a rather large-scale outfit, but I think they may also do yards. I'm not sure about that. You know them?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I don't know.
But they're very well respected. I do know that part.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing here just for a second. Okay. Denise would like to let us know that the University of Illinois Master Gardeners are focused on native plants. They do not do soil testing. They only recommend how to get a test from other sources.
Really?
Good.
Interesting. Well, that's good to
Thank
know.
you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I got to talk to the person who told me she does soil testing and see what she means. I know right who to go to.
Indeed. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for us. Thank you, Nancy and Jean, for joining us. We really appreciate all you shared today and all the questions that you answered, because there were quite a lot. So thank you.
Well, that's wonderful.
You, Matt.
That there were questions, and they were wonderful questions.
Good questions.
Yeah.
I
Thank you
agree.
so much for having us. It was a real pleasure to be here and to get to meet you by Zoom, Matt.
Well, good. I'm glad it was nice to meet me, but it was also very nice to meet you. And
Thank
to you all at home, thank you for joining us tonight. We will see you at the next one.